Welcome back. This is the Something Venture podcast. I'm Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today is Eliot Brown. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for doing this. Eliot is a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, but has written a book called "The Cult of WeWork: Adam Neumann and the Great Startup Delusion." When did we start doing that with books? By the way, having like an extra set, like the Catcher in the Rye.
The subtitle should just have two beats, or it should have no beats at all.
Well, actually, now I don't remember. Like, was Moby Dick the story of a man and a whale and the fight for the sea?
My historian friend tells me that, at least for a long time, every single book written about modern American history was blank, 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 and the making of modern America.
I think I've read about 9 of those in college. By the way, you were just at the Alley Cat bookstore in San Francisco.
Yes.
That's right. That's my neck of the woods. I live in the Mission.
Same.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Well, why are we doing this over the internet?
That's a good point. Like I got in the habit of doing. I never used to do this in remotely, because just being in person, like there's something about it. But then we kind of had to figure it out. How did that go, by the way? How was the Alley Cat?
It was good. It was largely a bunch of journalists and a couple other stragglers, but
nice.
Yeah, it was fun.
And you correctly, as a real estate guy, you correctly predicted the shrinking of the Mission District in San Francisco from census to census.
I was very proud of that prediction. I think people don't realize how much gentrification actually decreases population density, because you get these tiny, these families of like 5 people, often Latino, replaced by like one coder who works at Google.
Yeah. And do you know who I've been trying to, as I walk around, I kind of think like, so the Mission District, I think a long time ago, it was like an Irish working class thing, and then became a Hispanic thing, which are, kind of large families and stuff. Do you know who owns most of the buildings? Like, are there Hispanic families that are getting pushed out, but really rich?
That is a really good question. No, I don't know the answer to that, other than my existing building, which is owned by someone in the Sunset, I think.
Right.
But no, I actually don't know what the ownership rate of some of these. Yeah, we're how many of these were owned by immigrant families that bought something for $10,000 and now sell it for $2 million. Hopefully that is a happy story for some.
That'd be a pretty nice outcome. So how you wrote this book? You were a real estate reporter for the Wall Street Journal. How did you become a reporter? Like, why are you still a reporter? Why aren't you?
Yeah, well, so there's a long evolution there. Yeah, well, it's not that long, and certainly not that interesting. So, I got into reporting in college, sort of toward the tail end, trying to figure out what to do with my life. Really enjoyed it. I had, pondered the idea of doing stuff in government or politics or planning, but was drawn to reporting, and kind of, narrowly escaped some layoffs and whatnot at places as everyone was struggling. And reported on real estate in New York at the New York Observer, and then found my way to the Journal, covered real estate for a while, and then sort of midway through made the switch to covering venture capital and startups.
Real estate's become a pretty hot topic again.
Perennially. Yeah.
We have huge empty buildings everywhere. We had a president who was in the real estate business. Like,
or the fee licensing business that said he was in the real estate business.
Exactly. So how did you come to write a book? I read this book on a vacation, actually. I don't know why that's funny. It's a book, but it was like it read like I don't know. It was like a pretty fun book to read, I got to say. But it's a serious book and it's researched, but it was a pretty entertaining read.
Yeah, it's so my co-author and I had been reporting on this stuff for the Journal for years. I've gone back sort of further than her, Maureen Farrell. She covers capital markets and IPOs, so she came in toward the end. But like throughout, I started covering them back in like 2013 is when I first met them, and throughout it just always seemed like they were the embodiment of not only every concerning trend in Silicon Valley startup land, but then also just like happened to layer it with this journalistic gold. And so, right. Meaning just eye-catching fun stuff that's the caricature of the town, and sort of almost out of a plot of HBO's Silicon Valley, the show. And so, yeah, WeWork had a way of always not only doing stuff that was concerning, but also making it fun for readers.
And it goes back. So I feel like a lot of people sort of joined this story in progress. Like it first sort of emerged for a lot of people when I know you were covering it the whole way, but a lot of people know the part where it kind of goes public and it's kind of ridiculous, and not completely. It's a real estate thing. We can talk about that, but like this guy who's like this kind of Christ figure walks away with a couple $1 billion, and that's kind of where people tune in. What like it started with him, and we don't just spend too much time, but he kind of had his eye on something early on, right? Like I don't know, like early on he was kind of hanging out in celebrity circles, as I understand. Like by the way, there's a whole bunch of celebrity stuff in this book that I thought was just like fun.
That's another example of the stuff that just sort of came to us as a gift from the journalistic gods, where it's like, what is Ashton Kutcher and Demi Moore doing here, and like why is he
at their place,
like, giving his investors money to Ashton Kutcher for no clear reason at extremely large quantities?
Yeah. And so how does he start into this thing? Like, is he just like...
Yeah, I mean, so the thread is Adam, who's this Israeli 20-something who moves to New York, essentially just looking to get rich and have fun. So he had grown up on a kibbutz, and one of the lessons he took from this socialist experiment was that he wants to be a capitalist and make lots of money. So he comes to New York, and his sister happens to be a really kind of famous model in Israel, and she was making it big in New York. And so he just loves the scene that goes along with that. And then is for years kind of trying to find some way to make it rich. And he chooses baby clothes as the venue for that. And it did not work.
Right.
Yeah, I think he was like this good salesman in like the Javits Center in New York, where people would gather around him as he'd tell tales of why babies needed padded knee pads on their clothes.
Right.
But yeah, eventually sort of just stumbles upon this concept of co-working, not because he invented it, but because he saw someone else who had a business and it actually looked like a good business.
Right.
And so,
he picks up somewhere along the way. This is earlier in the book. Does he pick up like kind of a celebrity wife? Is that before he becomes famous that happens?
It's related. He was drawn to the celebrity crowd, and then is introduced to this to Rebecca Paltrow, who's the first cousin of Gwyneth Paltrow, and grew up in this very sort of Gatsby-like environment. And actually, she was born in Great Neck, which is, I think, the inspiration for West Egg or one of the eggs.
Yeah.
So he meets Rebecca around the time that he was starting the predecessor to WeWork. And then is sort of instantly drawn to her because she is, at least what friends believe, is because she had money and celebrity name, and then uses that to sort of meet a bunch of other rich people.
These people seem terrible to me. That's my thing. Like, I just think about that dinner party that they're at. I'm like, this just seems like it would be a terribly not fun dinner party, I've got to say.
Yeah, well, so it's funny that's the impression. I mean, I think it's certainly not my type of crowd for a nice intellectual dinner. But Adam at least is very fun. So people, part of his power is charm, and that people would just come into his office and immediately be like, "Man, this guy is so much more fun than my last meeting." Right. You're sort of just drawn to him, and he seems cool.
Yeah, and I also find this a weird thing where she kind of meets him and decides that he's a wit. Like, it's like a TV show, right? Like, I don't know anybody who
totally
like that, where they go like, oh, this guy's going to be a winner. I'm going to hitch my wagon to him. And
and someone else, a friend of there's this thought. She's like, Rebecca saw him as a project. It's this very weird relationship where it's unclear who really has the power, and they both are deeply insecure people, just deeply, and sort of so frequently being insecure with each other. But it still works. They just had the sixth kid, so they're apparently still quite happy.
So how does he get this thing going? Like, as it gets started, like, is there a point, before the sort of huge amounts of money come in that he's bootstrapping it or doing any of the traditional or struggling a little bit or just money from the beginning?
Yeah. It's and I guess it would be considered bootstrapping or sort of maybe not exactly that in standard Silicon Valley terms, but he basically initially finances it with some of the money that he has, and then also he raises money at a pretty high valuation, but just from a guy, a real estate guy who's into sort of growth companies, and that's where it's literally a few $1,000,000, if that. It's supposed to be 15, but the guy doesn't pay up the whole thing, and so for the first few, and he does that a similar thing for the next couple just chunks of investment and buildings. So he basically builds 2 to 3 buildings, maybe even 4 without traditional sort of venture funding. And it just is grabbing money here and there. I think the valuations were like 35 million to 45 million. But the thing actually is like economically, not that bad based on their own numbers. They actually do turn a profit in 2012. So they start in 2010 and gradually grow up to 2012. And they had sort of discovered this great time in the real estate market and urban environment where real estate rents were low. So they were signing leases with buildings at a pretty low rent.
Right.
Demand from sort of the hipster set, or demand for hipster tinged office space that you can rent monthly was really high. So they did find this kind of geyser, unexpected geyser of demand for what they were offering, which was like different than standard office space, where it's like, oh, you hang out near other people and
Right.
you get coffee together and it looks nice. It doesn't have drop ceilings and it doesn't feel claustrophobic. So it sort of looks like a Brooklyn coffee shop. And so there was it worked. Then essentially what happened, and the whole story from WeWork there is they raised money at really high valuations and then had to sort of fulfill the valuation, which implied that they were like a tech company, and they weren't.
Right. And how does it get from there? Because, so far you're like, okay, maybe Marriott comes along, you say, hey, if you take this building, you can actually stuff people in and rent it by the night, put a pool in, hey, put a bar in, it's a hotel, but it's a great business, but it's a hotel. And, you can have a hotel that has a keypad. Like, how does it get from there to like, okay, that's a really clever way to extract rent from a piece of land to, valuations that aren't like a little more than a regular co-working space, but like multiples more than a regular co-working space?
So it became sort of this vicious cycle or self-fulfilling, whatever propulsion machine, where basically Adam would in one round after another raise increasing amounts of money. Essentially every year he would raise double the amount of money and then plunge that into the company to grow. And then the company would double in size and be like, look at the size of this growth company, and look at its growth rate. It's growing so fast. You need to give me more money at a higher valuation. And then he'd get more money at a higher valuation, then grow twice as fast. And so everyone was kind of buying the growth without realizing that the growth was coming from the extra money. It was only a fundraising company, essentially.
Right.
And so, not every business can do that because not every business can find the demand. But in real estate, especially in this corner of the office market, the demand wasn't the issue as long as you were charging normal market rents.
Right. So is there a point where he realizes he's got to, because there's some point where he starts spending money even beyond that strategy, right? Where he's like, he seems to be using it in a personal way that I guess it's not illegal, but
right. I guess that was essentially he was essentially doing that from the beginning. It's just at different degrees. So pretty early on for the Series B, he takes $9 million. They raised $40 million. He takes $9 million of that and just lends it to himself. I mean, this is with board approval, but he lends it to himself and his co-founder. And so, this is the Series B, which is not traditionally a time that you're taking out a quarter of the round and putting it in your pocket.
Right.
But so he's doing that, and then they start flying private, renting, borrowing jets early on, I think around the Series B. And then he becomes completely addicted to that. And then you sort of see the crazy, it stays semi-disciplined, but then you see the crazy jump in. So Early on they're flying, or they're flying their entire camp to the Adirondack, the entire staff to the Adirondacks for a summer camp, which is essentially a booze fest and music fest for a few days. And then the most eye-catching one, sort of before all the money rolled in, was when they bought a 42% stake in this company called Wave Garden, which makes pools to go surfing in the middle of nowhere. So, meaning far from the ocean, you can go surfing in Texas, you can go surfing in Nebraska. You just have to build this giant Olympic-sized swimming pool that also makes 6-foot waves. So that one was not a standard purchase for a commercial real estate sublessor.
So who's on the board? So Benchmark, which is a renowned Silicon Valley venture firm, comes in at some point on this.
Yeah, they're the Series A.
They're the Series A guys. And then when did they, they were really in the mix on Uber. Are they really in the mix on this one, or they just kind of invested in
heavily? They were. So the one of the more interesting facets of this whole story is that you look at Theranos, and that's unsophisticated investors being duped by a charismatic entrepreneur who's lying.
Right.
This was Adam, he sort of lied around the edges, but the fundamental numbers were true. But he found really sophisticated investors, Benchmark being the most of them, and sort of convinced them to see something that wasn't. So they convinced them to look at numbers and ignore the thing you should do with numbers and be like, hey, it's losing a lot of money and this is a bad business. Because in real estate business.
Yeah, because in venture capital, it's kind of crazy, but things do that you don't expect take off. Like somebody does figure out quantum computing, or they do figure out Uber or something like that. And even Theranos, like they were lying, but if she really did have it figured out, okay, maybe it's a big deal. But like with this business, it seems like you would look at it and say, well, it's here, which is always terrible in venture capital. Like once the business exists, you're like, well, now I can analyze it. It's not going to, be the racehorse that wins. It still does seem like it was a real estate business that even the Benchmark guys would be like, yeah, it's a real estate business.
Yeah, that's kind of the craziest thing about this, is that this really involved everyone bending their minds to rationalize something that wasn't, because the value kept going up, because others kept seeing it too. So it was very much like an Emperor's New Clothes story, where for a long time everyone is telling each other, like, look at all the beautiful new clothes on that guy. And so they see this as a tech company or a growth company even though the numbers were right before them in front of their eyes. So, I think originally Benchmark sort of came in when they came in 2012, it was like, well, it's a real estate, like their core business is real estate, and we're concerned about that. We don't know much about that, but like this is the exact type of entrepreneur that we all have on our checklist of things that we want. And it's sort of like visionary seeming, amazing salesmen, because they know that sales are a super important part of this crazy ecosystem, and wanting to swing for the fences, and kind of crazy. So I think originally they were like, yeah, well, the guy can do a magic thing, so let's just see what happens. But then after that, everyone else comes in. They're like, well, Benchmark's in there, they must see something. And then people are like, well, JP Morgan's in there, they must see something. And then Harvard's in there, they must see something. And so then everyone, it kind of builds on itself, and everyone's like, yes, this is a more than a real estate company. And honestly, you can see the same type of thing with Tesla today.
Right. Well, is it possible that the Benchmark guys knew what this was? So there's this thing in the public markets now where stocks like GameStop just take off, and people are making a lot of money on them. They're like meme stocks, and people are investing in GameStop. They don't think it's cheap. They just think someone else is going to pay more. Mm-hmm. Is it like, which I guess doesn't really matter why they pay more. It's like you bought it at X, you sold it Y, you got rich. Is it possible that Benchmark was just like, okay, like, I just think someone will pay more. I think Tiger or one of these new guys is going to come in and pay more.
I think that there's, and I'm sure it would be impossible to get any of these people to admit that, but I think that had to be an element. It just can't not be, because these, again, we're smart people. However, I do think the prevailing thing, certainly that they tell each other out loud it's sort of tell journalists, was that this was this for all the investors, that they did see this as a growth company. And you'd have these conversations with them, because I was doing this for years, and you'd say, okay, but it's a real estate, like the people are paying them rent, and then they're paying someone else rent. Like all the money is coming from people looking for office space. And they'd say, yes, but look how fast it's growing. And then just like throw a bunch of sort of cherry pick numbers at you, which I think they in their minds really did believe that. That's kind of the craziest part to me.
Right. Well, that is the thing about real estate is that, you rent out something for you just take a desk. That doesn't go up 10 or 20x like other things do. It just, it can go up a lot. It can go up, what real estate's out of control in San Francisco, right? It's up 10% or something like that. It's not up like 9,000% year over year. The rent you pay, it can't.
Yeah, look, I use the example of Tesla, not just to be controversial, but because I think it's real. If you look at what's going on there, you have very sophisticated investors that get extremely mad at you, and very unsophisticated investors. You get extremely mad at you, anyone who says anything negative about Tesla, and even just pointing out, it's like, well, it's a car company with normal car company margins, maybe slightly better if it works to plan, and they're worth more than like all the car companies combined.
Right.
And they make fewer cars than Subaru. So it's very much a car company or energy company, however you want to categorize it, with a like insane software valuation. Right. But whatever it's an energy company, that the energy companies don't have software valuations.
Yeah.
So it's the same type of thing there. Obviously, there's a huge amount of differences between the entrepreneurs, but I think that's how people were looking. The sophisticated investors were looking at WeWork in part, which is like, well, the market is going to see this as like, have different rules for this guy.
Right. And we should point out how things work for Benchmark, at least earlier on in the Series B. They're probably investing like $15 or $20 million, right?
Yeah, it was 15.
So Benchmark, that actually doesn't mean anything to them. Like it doesn't, they have hundreds of millions of dollars. Like if it's a
they don't like to throw it around like NEA or just like a huge monster fund. Like they don't have, meaning they only had a $250 million fund. But yes, they don't expect 100% of their bets to pay off. And
they're in the Series B too, so they could, maybe they even did sell into the Series D and E and actually make a bunch of money when the people at the end don't.
They made a bunch of money. They first took money off the table, I believe, in the Series G. Right. So and they made more than they put in.
So now the later investors start coming in. But now it seems like you're getting into people who are putting in, Benchmark's probably not being irresponsible, putting, whatever it is, percent of their fund into something that could, maybe this guy is going to figure out something. But now you're getting into people putting in what seem like serious amounts of money into a company that you can actually diligence. Like you can go visit, do office visits. You can look at presumably audited financials that have revenue and profits. Like now what's happening with these later people? Are they just all keying off the last guy?
Yeah. So I think it's both keying off the last guy and their minds being warped by the sort of bubbly environment. So, the most interesting example that we found was the mutual funds. And I guess one of the themes is like, when we started the book, we didn't know as much about sort of how the financing happened. We just knew that it happened. And we thought, like, I remember thinking like, well, it kind of looks like Fidelity just came in at a $10 billion valuation 5 months after T Rowe. And they must have been like, man, well, T Rowe's in there. Now we need to get in there too. And that's kind of exactly what happened when we found out. It wasn't quite that simple, but it was like a sophisticated investor at T Rowe put in, thinking that it was part of the sharing economy because Uber and Airbnb were ascendant. No one really understood. Like Uber, in hindsight, was completely overvalued at that point. But,
right.
But everything made sense in that. It's like, well, Uber loses billions. Why can't we find another that loses billions? And then Fidelity, they initially had passed, but a different fund manager there didn't realize that. And then he sees that T Rose in it. He's like, how come I didn't see this company?
Right.
So he calls them in. He meets Adam, and he just gets won over by this charismatic entrepreneur in sort of Adam's brilliant fundraising way.
Yeah.
And within minutes, like is extremely excited about the investment.
Yeah.
They end up doing extensive due diligence. An analyst comes back and says, this is a real estate company. Here's the numbers why. But the fund manager, and then a much sort of more acclaimed fund manager at Fidelity, who runs a contra fund there, they, together decide, no, we like Adam. We think this is a bet worth taking. Here are the reasons it's not just a real estate company, and that's what we're looking at. And so we're doing this investment.
So this seems crazy to me that these guys are at big companies or benchmark. Like, yeah, he's charismatic, but don't these guys doesn't Bono come play their Christmas party and they've probably met Barack Obama? Like, how charismatic is this guy? Like, there's a lot of charismatic people.
Yeah, I think he just had this particularly adept way at zeroing in on what people wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And so depending who he was talking to, it was a tech company, it was a growth company, it was a completely revolutionized the real estate company. To SoftBank, it was an AI company because SoftBank was really big into AI. And so he was able to find people's insecurities, or, with this fund manager, he like immediately tells him like, oh, the energy is so much better with you than your colleagues. And this is something that like works with the fund manager.
Right.
I think it's the other thing that is, and I guess this is true of any really good salesman, he makes it all about narrative. Like he makes it so you can't just, point to their past performance, and it's all about where they're going. And he really just has this way of putting you in the future, in the present. So when I first met him, he was talking about, he's like, look how great our business is. When we open up in Portland in 9 months, we'll be full within 3 weeks. And then I'm like, wow, that's amazing. What a great business. And then
that's never happened in Portland before.
Right. Like, how could he know that? They've never even been to Portland.
Right. Yeah, it does seem funny too. And, there's the concept of sort of pattern matching. And I know some venture firms, they say they look for these messianic guys, but that's actually like Mark Zuckerberg was kind of a public speaking disaster, and Larry and Sergey aren't crazy. Like, actually, putting aside Steve Jobs, and more crimes are committed in the name of Steve Jobs, like a lot of these guys who are Brian Chesky at Airbnb, they're not messianic charismatic guys.
I think yes and no. I think when you sit down with a bunch of those people, they do end up being really good in-person salesmen. Like Brian Chesky definitely has that. And Alex Karp of Palantir, who raised, similarly billions of dollars for what was a SaaS company, but in reality was just like a consulting company in terms of the way it ran its business. So I think, I agree that Mark Zuckerberg, if you look at the great CEOs, there's also a big dose of Asperger's, right?
Yes.
But Adam did not have that. So I think it's. This place does seem to run on really small sample sizes and very distinct contradictory lessons from each of those sample sizes. And it's like, well, Bezos doesn't use PowerPoint, so we shouldn't use PowerPoint. Right. Like,
right. So we kind of get to the crescendo. So now everyone's in except for the investment bankers. It's all over, but taking it public, right? So now the bankers certainly have the analysts and the firepower to think through, and they probably cover a bunch of real estate companies. Like,
well, it's funny with the analysts. So we never really got to a point where any of the analysts put out their reports, because they're only allowed to do that after they go public. But the analysts were I think almost more a victim of the Adam show than others, because like he did an analyst day where they bring in all the analysts before the IPO, and they apparently went really well. And like some of them are going up there and taking selfies with him.
Oh boy,
in this room, and they also we were really curated the room. Like Rebecca freaked out because there weren't enough plants in it. But so I guess more what happened aside from the analysts is the public market investors, as we were going around doing this pre-roadshow meeting with specific investors, they are not getting dazzled quite as much. And then the really big thing that happens is they release the public version of their S1. And so that essentially gives the entire media, the entire financial world, anyone who has the internet, the ability to see WeWork only in the way they present it in this document, and because they aren't really allowed to talk at that point.
Right.
And it was a dumpster fire. Like, if you really just look at the numbers, which is what some of us have been doing all along, it was just a company that lost, it spent $2 for every dollar it took in.
And these are the things that you had been reporting on the whole way
for years
in this document, right? Like, this is kind of the document going, yeah, they spent millions of, well, they were spending money on, they were paying him for things. He was buying real estate, leasing it back to them, like all kinds of stuff were not exactly illegal, but
there were like 3 buckets of problems with this thing. So there was like the financials of just like, how is this a company, even if it just loses $1 for every dollar it takes in. And then there was the sort of the way it was written in this very like woo-woo aspect, woo-woo approach, where it's like, we want to elevate the world's consciousness and we're dedicating this to the energy of we. And so you couldn't even really tell what the business was. And then sort of thirdly, I think most importantly, is it was just full of these conflicts of interest, these things that Adam had wanted to do for years and didn't think were a problem, like taking out enormous loans against the stock, like buying a jet, which wasn't disclosed actually, and selling stock, which wasn't disclosed. And but then the things that were disclosed were profiting off of by leasing property to the company, profiting off of the trademark for the word we. And so he was, literally personally enriching himself at the cost of the company, in some respects. And that when everyone sees that mixed with these other things, it's like, how has this become the country's most valuable startup? And this was the sort of the parade in the Emperor's New Clothes story, where everyone at once it's like, oh, it's not a real estate company. I mean, it's not a tech company.
Is there a board here that has anything to do with anything? Like, is it just the venture cap? Like, what is the board? Like, I know the boards are in the pockets.
The board had been, I would say, grumpy for years about some of these transgressions, but not. They certainly didn't stand up in any way that mattered. They would have some mini confrontations, but then approve things unanimously. And I think the reason for that was, the real reason for that is because the board decided to give Adam full control. So at the end of the day, he could fire the board. And so they I think, viewed their role more as consultants who didn't want to get on Adam's bad side, because if you did, what was the point? He was still going to do what he wanted. I think the theory went, and the hole in that is that you had board members who weren't Adam, and so if all of them individually voted no against him buying a jet, then it wouldn't have passed. And like, Adam could have blown up the board and completely installed new cronies, but that's a pretty nuclear option for a jet.
And I guess if you think it through, none of it, like, now it's all crazy, but maybe a real estate company would have a jet to get around to their properties around the world. Like, I'm not sure that's what he was doing with it, but
and probably not the absolute most expensive jet you could buy, but from Gulfstream, but
And now across all of this, there's not like any Me Too stuff, or there's some drugs, but it seems kind of like, hey, smoking pot.
Not with Adam. The company was a bit of a hot mess when it came to culture, and certainly there were accusations of sort of lower level people, which was the same type of thing sweeping corporate America at the time. Right. But like that never came up with Adam in any serious way we've heard of. So I think it was, the biggest things were the sort of conflicts of interest and self-enrichment.
So as it kind of comes a cropper with Adam, okay, now it just fails to go public. Is there any repercussion? Is there like an investment bank that was like, whoops, or like how do we get to getting him out of the company? Finally?
Well, the investment banks didn't get paid at first, so because they had done lots of free work, it was sort of with the expectation of getting paid. But then fear not, they did get something. JP Morgan, got negotiated some and then renegotiated some fee from WeWork for.
So finally, those guys get a break.
They get a break. The investment banker gets promoted. The investment bankers at Goldman who worked on it get promoted. yes, the short answer is everyone went on to do great things and got rich.
And Adam,
happily ever
how does
after.
I forget, he resigns or he's pushed like.
So he resigns under pressure. So I had written or sent them the fact checking questions for a story on about a lot of his erratic behavior and sort of megalomania while they were about to launch the roadshow. So then they pull the roadshow. And then the story comes out, and I think they quickly realize, for both because of the story, but also because of much more because of everything that had come before, that the market was just not going to support him as CEO, right. And they needed money. They desperately needed money, and they were running out, and to the point where they couldn't afford to lay off staff. Right. So then the board, essentially moves against him for the first time ever, and this completely pliant board stands up and essentially makes him realize, well, you can fight and the company will go to zero, but you like money. We know that about you. And right. So the most rational thing for you to do is to not fight and step aside, and then we'll find financing from someone else.
And they give him this massive exit package. And in all of this is kind of one thing I don't, because VCs and they're famous for like, once you're not hot, push you aside, stab you in the back, see you later. Like, you haven't done anything for me lately. But what is the leverage? Because he walks away with $2 billion. And so, like, how does this work? And how do I get this job?
Everyone gets their comeuppance. Yeah. So it depends how you want to count it. But it's certainly, even at the most conservative level, it's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, sort of severance package of all time. Right. And that was essentially because he was clinging on to founder control. So he still, even after he stepped aside as CEO, he still controlled the company. And so he was a pretty awful negotiator when it came to using WeWork's money to buy companies. But when it came to his personal compensation, right. He has proved to be one of the world's best negotiators. So
obviously, yeah.
Yeah, I think he realized that SoftBank, which was providing the rescue money at the time, was in a really hard place itself. They were struggling to raise a second vision fund, and WeWork was this total egg on their face, and they just wanted to be done with it. And so he got them to give him a $185 million consulting fee. They refinanced a loan on favorable terms for $500 million. And they let him sell his stock at a price that proved to be sort of overvalued, and to sell, at the time, $1 billion of stock. Now, the quick version is he renegotiated that later because everyone sued each other and they didn't pay. But in the end, he walked away with, let's see, he got like $200 million in essentially cash, and then he got another $200 million in stock that or a revised stock award. Which, amusingly enough, was initially intended to incentivize him to bring the market cap of the company from 50 billion past 80 billion, but it's 8 billion, and he still got it anyway.
So he's doing okay. So in the end, it seems like the system kind of worked, right? Like at the last minute, the people who got, I don't know if anybody got screwed, they got promoted. Like the little guy didn't get hurt. In this
I mean, whoever was an investor in Fidelity's fund, that they got hurt. SoftBank's investors, who were largely Saudis and UAE, they got hurt. But those aren't standard sob stories. The employees really got hurt. Sure. But I think the thing that surprised us the most was that we thought this was going to be a lesson, and that the system, because this whole WeWork, the whole point of our story in the book is like, this wasn't just WeWork. WeWork was just the apotheosis of a broken system. And so we thought the system, sort of reality, had returned. But
for a while, I've forgotten a whole bunch of these things but for a while the market did really cool to new offerings. Yes. After this. Because of this
offerings, late stage fundraisings, and suddenly VCs like Fred Wilson were pontificating on Twitter about how important it is to have a company with like good gross margins. Yeah, I thought that was what you guys did.
Yeah, they just went and replaced the word growth in all their tweets to profit.
Right. Yeah.
what
And
I
like,
meant.
yeah, that was a really fun where everyone like starts talking as though it's some profound realization. Like we realized we need to have companies that have a path to profitability.
Yeah.
It's like, isn't that what a company is? Like, if it's not, it's just a nonprofit. Like, what's the point?
Right. Well, what do you think if Adam went out now and said, I'm raising $100 million to start a new company, would happen?
I think that Silicon Valley always rewards these people.
He'd
Like,
get
so
it,
that's,
right?
and I'm sure there's some rational reason for that.
Yeah.
Like a very dominant, important skill in this messed up region is just fundraising and sales, and he's got that part down. So maybe if you combine him with somebody who actually knows what they're doing, you could have something that works, or maybe he'll build something that actually is profitable and build a software company.
It's such a crazy story. So how are you feeling now that the book is like out in the world, and would you write a book again, or how you feel like?
Oh my God. No time soon. It was a lot of effort. I mean,
Right.
Maureen and I, we took 6 months off work. We spent a lot of time at work for the better part of, essentially a 2-year endeavor. I think we're almost right around the 2-year anniversary of when WeWork's S1 went flipped public.
Right.
It was fun. We'll see how I would really hope people, pick up the book and sort of take lessons from it and think about it for more than a hot minute and think about it in the context of broader venture capital and startup ecosystem here, as opposed to just like, here's this silly story about this crazy guy. Because I think it connects to everything.
I do find it funny that books like this are now just like among the most entertaining books that you read. I mean, yes, it's a business book and lessons and all that, but it is it was a page turner for me. I've got to say.
Well, that's good to hear. Yeah, I mean, look, that's how we would just in the reporting process. Maureen and I would just talk on the phone all the time, and our mouths would be agape with new stuff we'd learn, like sort of day by day. And it's like, I don't know, they had like a 240-foot yacht, and like everyone, like they flew someone from WeWork to the Maldives just to give a PowerPoint. Like
Right. I guess we've learned over the past few years, if you just go all the way to being audacious, like people just don't know what to do. It just freezes their brain.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what lessons people take. I mean, one friend, I think he was half tongue in cheek, was saying like, "Oh, I've learned a lot about how to be a good fundraiser from Adam." And in the book, and so in the same way that in the book we have the scene where Adam, essentially the lesson he takes from the movie, The Social Network, is like, wow, look at that cool guy and how he built a company, as opposed to look at that evil guy and how he like.
Oh, that happened in the 80s, famously with the movie Wall Street in the 80s, which was an indictment of the corruption of Wall Street. Greed is good became a thing that drove all kinds of kids to investment banking. Like, so that's kind of a classic meme. Has Hollywood picked this up? Is there going to be a
it's a strange world. That's another mini bubble of itself. So before we had titled the book or had any idea what was going in the book, we sold the rights to the book.
Yep.
And I was like, well, what are we selling the rights to? But we sold them.
Yep.
This is apparently how it works. Yep. Amazon briefly then bought it from the producer, but Apple TV moved quicker, and so Apple TV is filming a different version, not based on our book.
All right. So who is going to play Adam in this?
So it was with our thing. It was going to be cousin Greg from Succession, Nicholas Braun.
That guy's great.
He's great. We had lunch with him, and he was very excited about it. But the winner here is Jared Leto on the Apple TV. Anne Hathaway is playing Rebecca. So I mean, they're literally filming. Have been filming the past few weeks. So.
Now, are you in it?
No, I mean, not that I know of.
Well, the reporter.
I hope so.
Who's going to play you?
Had an effect on the company's trajectory, but that's up to them. I have no idea.
Who would you have play you?
I Ryan Gosling, just for the physical likeness.
Plus, yes. Plus, he's funny.
Yes, all those things.
So, what do you make? We finish up at what do you kind of think it like now? What do you make of is this just sort of a blip on the landscape and the sort of party's back on and it's kind of quaint, or I don't know. What do you make of the landscape now in Silicon Valley?
It kind of depresses me. I think, I mean, some things have changed. Like, you don't have these kind of crazy, particularly loss addicted consumer companies that can just burn through billions in 6 months. So That seems to have changed, but overall, I mean, I think that the bubble, the froth has just sort of moved to other sectors, and like SPACs, electric vehicles, space, like there's all these things that it's actually gotten crazier, and the public markets are not being the guardrails on this. They're actually fueling it.
Right.
And so you see this thing where, you know, it was with us, like WeWork had revenue and they were like projecting great profits, and that was crazy. Now you have companies with no revenue at all,
right,
that VCs pass on, and then they go to the public markets and raise, you know, hundreds of millions, if not over $1 billion.
Right.
So it's
really
crazy.
Is there another one you said? You know, it's funny. I was one of those the other day. I was talking to somebody about the company Picasa. Do you know what this is?
No,
I think it has like $1 billion valuation. That may or may, it's a podcast, so whether it's true or not, I think that's right. And it's basically they buy a house for like $8 million, or no, $2 or $3 million, like a nice house up in Sonoma or Napa or something, and then they sell it in 8 pieces. You know, so you own.
Right. Okay, no. We had a story about this in the journal.
You own like 1/8 of it.
Yeah,
and I was like, oh man, like, isn't that a timeshare? Like, isn't that like a thing that they have in Miami, like since fairness, the 70s?
Given that timeshares tend not to be very good investments for the buyers, I presume they're very good investments for the sellers.
Yeah, I guess that's true. It could be a great business.
Yeah, maybe it's a brilliant business.
That's funny. Well, this is great. I really appreciate your spending some time on this. It's such a great story, and such a great book. It's called The Cult of We, and then WeWork, Adam Neumann, and the Great Startup Delusion. I really recommend. It's important and all that, but it's an entertaining read too.
Well, glad you liked it. Yeah, hopefully others do too. We haven't gotten any, any hate mail yet, but I'm sure that'll come at some point.
And a lot of the reviews, by the way, you can look it up, but a lot of the reviews are similar to what I'm saying. They're very.
We've gotten rave reviews.
You have gotten rave reviews.
Which is, I didn't realize was actually a thing. It's not, you know, there's some people like categorize it that way in the industry. It's like, oh, I thought it was a little more subjective, but
yeah, no, they're excellent reviews, and it's a great book. So, Eliot Brown's my guest. Thanks so much.